Ambassador Chen Liu stood in the center of the great hall, her hands folded behind her back. Above her, the dome stretched into darkness filled with floating platforms. On each platform sat representatives from the 7 founding species of the Galactic Council. She had practiced this moment for 3 years, but her heart still raced. "Honored Council," she began, her voice carried by hidden speakers to every corner of the chamber. "Humanity seeks membership among the stars." The Zephyr delegate Vathek shifted on his crystalline seat. His body caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. He touched a control and the space above Chen filled with images. Earth appeared blue and green, turning slowly. "We have watched your species for 50 years, Vathek said. His voice sounded like wind through crystal caves. "We have studied your history. We have seen your wars." The image changed. Now it showed old Earth battlefields, soldiers in trenches, their faces covered in mud, cities burning under bombs, mushroom clouds rising over empty deserts. Chen watched without expression, though she knew every image by heart. "Your first world war killed 17 million, Vathek continued. "Your second killed 70 million. You created weapons that could destroy your entire planet." The Krathar representative, Commander Threx, leaned forward. His insect-like body clicked and whirred. "You used chemical weapons on your own kind. You burned cities filled with civilians. You invented new ways to kill each other almost every decade." More images appeared. The climate wars of 2089, where entire nations fought over water and farmland. Refugees streaming across burning continents. Automated weapons cutting down crowds. Chen remembered these from her history classes. Every human child learned about the dark years. "And then," Vathek said, his voice softer now, "you stopped." The images changed again. Now they showed peace treaties being signed, weapons being destroyed, the global armistice of 2134, when every nation on Earth agreed to end war forever, children playing in parks where battlefields once stood, cities rebuilt reaching toward the sky. "For 253 years you have had no major conflicts," Vathek said. "You have turned all your weapons into tools. You have made your soldiers into rescue workers. You have written laws that forbid war under any circumstance." The Delphine representative, a being of flowing water held in a containment suit, spoke in bubbling tones. "Your literature from this period is remarkable. Thousands of books about the horrors of war, millions of personal stories about loss and pain. Your artists create monuments to peace. Your children are taught from birth that violence is the greatest evil." Vathek pulled up more data, strings of numbers and graphs that Chen couldn't quite read from her position. "We have consulted with our best psychologists and anthropologists. The conclusion is clear. Humans have developed what we call war aversion syndrome. You fear conflict so deeply that you have restructured your entire civilization to avoid it. Is this assessment correct, Ambassador?" Threx asked, his compound eyes fixed on her. Chen chose her words carefully. "Humanity has learned many lessons from our past. We understand the cost of war better than most species." "That is not quite an answer," Threx observed. "It is the answer I can give," Chen replied calmly. Vathek seemed satisfied. "The Council has made its decision. Humanity is granted protectorate status. You may join our community, but you will not be assigned military duties. Your trauma regarding warfare makes you unsuitable for combat roles." Chen felt something twist in her stomach, but she kept her face neutral. "And what roles will humans fill?" "Cultural exchange, scientific research, diplomatic services," Vathek listed. "Your fear of conflict actually makes you ideal mediators. You will help other species resolve their disputes peacefully. This is a great honor." The other council members made sounds of agreement. The insectoid Krathar clicked their approval. The crystalline Zephyr rang like bells. The aquatic Delphine bubbled happily. "There is one condition," Threx said. "Human ships may carry only defensive weapons, nothing capable of offensive operations. We cannot risk a species with your violent history having access to weapons of war, even if you fear using them." Chen bowed. "Humanity accepts these terms. We are grateful for the Council's wisdom." "Then it is done," Vathek announced. "Welcome to the Galactic Council, humanity. May you find peace among the stars as you have found it on Earth." The ceremony ended with music, strange and beautiful sounds from a dozen different worlds. Chen smiled and shook hands, tentacles, claws, and crystalline appendages. She answered questions about Earth culture and human art. She accepted congratulations from species she had never seen before. But inside, she was counting the hours until she could return home. 3 days later, Chen stood in a small office deep inside the United Earth Defense Command. The room had no windows. The walls were thick concrete lined with metal. No signals could get in or out. It was one of the most secure rooms on the planet. Admiral Sarah Kane sat behind a plain desk reading Chen's report on a paper document. Real paper, the old-fashioned kind, because even encrypted digital files could be hacked. When she finished reading, Kane looked up. Her gray eyes were sharp despite her age. They actually believed it, Kane said. It wasn't quite a question. Every word, Chen confirmed. She poured herself water from a pitcher on the desk. Her hands were steady now. The diplomatic mask finally dropped. They think we're traumatized pacifists who neutered ourselves out of fear. Did you correct them? You told me not to. Kane smiled, but there was no humor in it. Good, what did Vathek say exactly? Chen pulled up the memory. He said humans have war aversion syndrome, that we fear conflict so deeply we've become incapable of it, that our 250 years of peace prove we've evolved beyond violence. Evolved beyond violence. Kane repeated slowly. She stood and walked to a safe built into the wall. Her handprint and retinal scan opened it. Inside were real paper files, the kind kept off every computer network. She pulled one out and laid it on the desk. Chen recognized the seal. Strategic Command, eyes only. The highest security classification that existed. They got it backwards, Kane said. We didn't stop having wars because we became afraid of them. We stopped because we became too good at them. She opened the file. Chen saw lists of weapons, battle plans, training programs. Entire fleets of warships hidden in the asteroid belt and the Kuiper belt. Places the Council's long-range sensors couldn't reach. Divisions of soldiers trained in combat techniques the Council didn't know existed. Weapons that would terrify the crystalline Zephyr and horrify the insectoid Krathar. The global armistice wasn't about peace, Kane continued. It was about survival. We reached a point where the next war would be the last war, so we made a choice. We unified under one command. We turned our weapons toward space instead of each other. We prepared for external threats instead of internal ones. The Council thinks our weapons restrictions are about trust, Chen said. Let them think that. It's safer for everyone. Kane closed the file and locked it away again. They see our anti-war literature and peace monuments and think we're afraid. They don't understand. We're not afraid of war, Chen. We're afraid of what we become during war. Chen thought about the images Vathek had shown. The trenches and bombs and burning cities. Do you think we'll ever have to show them the truth? Kane returned to her desk. She looked tired suddenly, older than her 70 years. I hope not. I really hope not. Because if we do, if humanity ever stops restraining itself... She trailed off. What? Chen prompted. The galaxy will learn something important, Kane said quietly. The difference between a species that can't fight and a species that chooses not to. And I'm not sure they'll like the lesson. Chen left the office an hour later with new orders. She would return to the Council as humanity's permanent ambassador. She would accept their limitations gracefully. She would let them think humans were gentle, frightened creatures who just wanted to paint pictures and write poetry among the stars. And deep in the asteroid belt, Admiral Kane would continue building the fleets that the Council would never see. Just in case. Just in case the galaxy needed to learn that human fear of war wasn't weakness. It was respect for what humanity could do when the gloves came off. 3 years passed quickly in the halls of the Galactic Council. Ambassador Chen Liu spent her days helping alien species settle disputes over trade routes and mining rights. She listened to complaints about territorial boundaries and cultural misunderstandings. She smiled and nodded and helped everyone find peaceful solutions. The Council praised humanity's diplomatic skills. Vathek wrote papers about how humans made perfect mediators because they understood suffering. Other species requested human advisors for their governments. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then the colony on Helios 7 went silent. Chen was in a meeting about agricultural exports when the emergency alert sounded. The chamber's calm lights turned red. Vathek's crystalline body flashed with alarm colors. What's happening? Asked the Delphine representative. A hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed a star chart with Helios 7 marked in red. We've lost contact with the mining colony, announced a Krathar technician. All communications are dead. The orbital satellites are offline. Send a scout ship, Threx ordered. It's probably just equipment failure. But it wasn't equipment failure. The scout ship reached Helios 7 36 hours later. What they found made the crew flee back to Council space, their minds broken by what they'd seen. The planet was stripped bare. The cities were gone. The mines were empty. Every living thing had vanished. The ground itself looked different, like something had eaten the rock down to deeper layers. Where did everyone go? Chen asked, watching the footage in the emergency session. Not went, Threx said grimly. Taken, consumed. Look at the scan data. Chen studied the numbers. The planet's mass had decreased by 3%. 3% of an entire world just gone. And there were signs of organic material. Vast amounts of it, but not the right kind. Not colonist bodies or native life. Something else. Something that had fed and grown and moved on. A week later, 3 more colonies went dark. Then 7. Then 15. The Council deployed its defense fleets to investigate. Commander Threx himself led the largest force to the Talos sector, where 5 colonies had disappeared in a single day. Chen watched from the Council chambers as the fleet jumped into the sector. They found the enemy waiting. By the stars, Vathek whispered as the images came through. The things looked like ships, but they were alive. Massive creatures covered in armor plates that grew from their own bodies. They moved like insects, quick and jerky. There were hundreds of them, thousands swarming around a planet that was slowly being devoured from the surface up. All ships, combat formation. Threx's voice came over the comm. Prepare weapons. The Council fleet opened fire. Energy beams cut through space. Missiles streaked toward the swarm. For a moment, Chen felt hope. The weapons hit their targets, tearing through the organic armor. But the creatures didn't die. They adapted. Their armor changed, grew thicker, became reflective. The next volley of energy beams bounced off harmlessly. The missiles detonated too early, stopped by some kind of field the creatures generated, and then the swarm attacked. They moved faster than the Council ships. They fired weapons that weren't quite energy, and weren't quite matter. Something in between that ate through shields and hull plating like acid. 3 Council cruisers died in the first minute. 7 more in the second. Retreat, Threx ordered. All ships emergency jump. Half the fleet made it out. The other half bought them time with their lives. Chen stood frozen as the chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted in a dozen languages. Vathek's crystal body pulsed with colors Chen had never seen before. Probably some kind of fear response. What were those things? Someone demanded. The xenobiologists are calling them the devourer swarm, a technician reported. They're a hive mind. Every creature is connected. They learn from every encounter and adapt instantly, and they consume everything, living or not, to fuel their growth. How do we fight them? Asked the Delphinae. Nobody had an answer. Over the next 3 months, the situation went from bad to worse. The swarm spread like a plague across the outer rim. Every world they touched became a barren rock. The Council's military tried every weapon, every tactic. Nothing worked for long. The swarm learned too fast. Commander Threx assembled the largest battle fleet in Council history. 20,000 ships, every major species represented. The finest weapons technology the galaxy had to offer. They met the swarm at Sigma Station. The battle lasted 4 hours. 19,000 ships were destroyed. Threx escaped with the survivors, but Chen saw his report. She saw the defeat in his eyes during the video conference. They're not just adapting, Threx said. His voice was hollow. They're learning our strategy. They predict our moves. Every battle makes them stronger. How? Vathek asked. They're consuming our computers, our databases, our crew members. Everything they eat, they learn from. They're becoming smarter with every world they take. Chen felt cold. She'd seen projections. At the current rate, the swarm would reach the Council's core worlds in 6 months. They would reach Earth in 8. The Council called an emergency summit. Every member species sent their leaders. The Great Chamber was packed with beings from across the galaxy, all terrified, all desperate. We need to evacuate the rim worlds, someone suggested. Evacuate to where? Another replied. They'll follow us. They'll consume the core worlds next, then the home worlds. There's nowhere to run. We could try negotiating. With what? They don't communicate. They just eat. The arguments went on for hours. Chen sat in the human section, saying nothing, watching. Next to her sat Captain Marcus Shaw, officially listed as a commercial transport captain. Unofficially, he was one of Admiral Caney's best fleet commanders. How long? Shaw whispered to her. They're close to asking, Chen replied quietly. It took another 2 hours, another dozen arguments. Another report of 3 worlds going dark. Finally, Vathek turned to the human delegation. Ambassador Chen, he said, humanity has the largest civilian transport fleet in Council space. We need help evacuating colonies. We need medical support for the refugees. He trailed off. Chen met his crystalline gaze steadily. You need more than transport ships, she said softly. The chamber went quiet. Every eye, every sensor, every alien attention focused on her. We've read your history, Threx said. Your wars, your weapons, but you're pacifist now. You chose peace. You fear war. Yes, Chen agreed. We fear war very much. Then you can't help us fight, Chen stood. Shaw stood beside her. Commander Threx, may I clarify something? Please. When we said humans fear war, the Council assumed that meant we're incapable of fighting, that our fear made us weak, she paused. That was a misunderstanding. Vathek leaned forward. What do you mean? We don't fear war because we're bad at it, Chen said. We fear it because we're very, very good at it. We stopped fighting each other because we realized what would happen if we didn't. It wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. The chamber stayed silent. Chen could feel the weight of their attention, their confusion, their hope, their doubt. Are you saying, Threx began slowly, that humanity can fight the swarm? I'm saying we've been preparing for something like this for 250 years, Chen replied. We haven't just been building transport ships in the asteroid belt. We've been building fleets, training soldiers, running combat simulations. We studied every war we ever fought and learned from them. We're ready. But the restrictions, Vathek protested. You agreed to only defensive weapons. You accepted protectorate status. Shaw smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. You restricted what we could bring into Council space. You never asked what we kept at home. Chen pulled out a small device and activated it. A hologram appeared showing a ship, massive and angular, covered in weapons. Then another. Then 100 more. Admiral Caney is awaiting your authorization, Chen said. But I need you to understand what you're asking for. If humanity enters this war, we won't fight the way you fight. We won't show mercy. We won't negotiate. We'll do whatever is necessary to eliminate the threat completely, because that's what humans do when we stop being afraid of ourselves. Vathek's colors shifted. Will it be enough? I don't know, Chen admitted. But it's your only chance. The vote was unanimous. The Council authorized full human military deployment. No restrictions, no limitations. Chen sent the signal to Admiral Caney. Authorization confirmed. They've agreed to wake the dragon. Caney's reply came seconds later. Tell them we're already in position. The 7th Fleet is jumping to Zephyr Prime in 10 minutes. Time to show them what humanity really is. In her quarters that night, Chen stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were moving into combat positions. Soldiers were checking their weapons. Officers were reviewing battle plans centuries old. The galaxy was about to learn a terrible truth. Humanity didn't evolve beyond violence. They just learned to control it. And now that control was about to break, she whispered to the empty room, God help us all. Vathek watched from the orbital defense station as the sky above his homeworld turned black. The devourer swarm had arrived at Zephyr Prime in numbers that made his crystalline body pulse with terror. 12 billion of his people lived on the surface below. In 3 hours, the swarm would begin feeding. In 6 hours, his species' homeworld would be a dead rock. All defense platforms are firing, his aide reported. No effect. They're adapting too fast. Vathek felt his colors dim. This was how his people expressed despair. He thought about his family on the surface. His younglings, who had just begun to form their first crystals. He would never see them grow now. Then space tore open. Not the normal shimmer of Council jump drives, but violent rips in reality itself. Quantum tunnels that shouldn't exist according to known physics, and through those impossible holes came ships unlike anything Vathek had ever seen. They were huge, angular, painted gray and black. Every surface bristled with weapons. Dozens of ships, then hundreds. They formed a wall between Zephyr Prime and the swarm, and they didn't hesitate. The humans opened fire. Vathek had seen Council weapons, energy beams that burned and sliced, missiles that exploded. They were precise, efficient, elegant. The human weapons were none of those things. They were brutal. Massive cannons fired projectiles at incredible speeds. Not energy, just solid metal moving so fast it punched through swarm armor like paper. Missiles streaked across space. each one tipped with nuclear warheads that painted the darkness with brief new suns. Beams of superheated plasma carved through swarm bioships, leaving melted organic matter floating in space. "What are they doing?" Vathek's aide whispered. "Winning," Vathek replied, unable to look away. The swarm tried to adapt. Their armor thickened, became reflective. But the humans just switched weapons. Kinetic rounds became cluster munitions that spread out before impact. Energy weapons changed frequency mid-flight. The nuclear missiles were replaced by something else, something that made entire swarm ships just stop moving, frozen in space. "Get me the human commander," Vathek ordered. The screen flickered. A human face appeared. Hard eyes, scarred face, gray hair cut short. "Captain Marcus Shaw of the ESS Endeavour." "Captain Shaw, what are those weapons?" Shaw glanced at something off-screen. "The frozen ones? Electromagnetic pulse bombs. They shut down the swarm's nervous system. Doesn't kill them permanently, but it gives us time for the follow-up strike." As he spoke, smaller ships darted forward. They attached to the frozen swarm vessels and fired rockets point-blank into what looked like weak spots. The swarm ships exploded from the inside. "How did you know where to shoot?" Vathek asked. "We've been studying them since they appeared. Their biology has patterns. Everything has weak points if you know where to look." Shaw smiled, and it made Vathek's crystals pulse with something like fear. "Humans are very good at finding weak points." The battle continued. The swarm sent more ships, thousands of them, but the human fleet didn't break. They fought with a coordination Vathek had never seen. Every ship knew exactly where every other ship was. They covered each other, supported each other, moved like parts of a single organism. "They're using combined arms warfare." Threx's voice came over the comm. The Krathar commander had arrived with council reinforcements. "Each ship type supports the others. Artillery ships fire from long range while the faster attack ships close in. The heavy ships draw fire while the small ships exploit gaps." "It's beautiful." "It's terrifying," Vathek corrected. Then the humans deployed their marines. Boarding pods launched from human ships. Small craft that somehow made it through the swarm's defensive fire. They attached to swarm vessels like parasites. Figures in powered armor cut through the biohulls and entered the enemy ships. Vathek pulled up the internal feeds. What he saw made him wish he hadn't. Human soldiers moved through the swarm ships with deadly efficiency. They wore armor that made them twice their normal size, carrying weapons that fired explosive rounds. They worked in small teams, covering corners, tossing grenades into organic chambers where swarm creatures nested. It wasn't clean. It wasn't elegant. It was systematic extermination. One team reached what looked like a nerve center, a pulsing organic computer that controlled the ship. A human soldier planted charges and the team ran. The explosion tore the ship apart from within. "This is insane," Vathek's aide said. "They're boarding enemy vessels during combat." "They're not just boarding them," Threx observed. "They're winning. Every ship they've boarded has been destroyed within 10 minutes. The battle raged for 6 hours. The swarm threw everything they had at the human fleet. They adapted, evolved, changed their tactics. But the humans adapted faster. When the swarm learned to resist the EMP weapons, the humans switched to acid-based munitions that ate through the adapted armor. When the swarm created stronger shields, the humans fired weapons that teleported inside the shields before detonating. "Where did they learn all this?" Vathek asked Chen, who had arrived on the station to observe. "From fighting each other," Chen replied quietly. "Every weapon you've seen today we invented to use on ourselves. We've had 5,000 years of warfare to perfect the art of killing. But you stopped. You chose peace." "We chose not to use these things on each other anymore," Chen corrected. "We never forgot how. We just pointed our weapons outward instead." The swarm finally began to retreat. The survivors fled into quantum space, pursued by human fighters that didn't give them any mercy. When the last swarm ship was destroyed, the human fleet took up defensive positions around Zephyr Prime. Vathek's planet was saved. The swarm was driven off. 12 billion crystalline beings would live to see another day. But Vathek felt no joy. He felt fear. Admiral Caney arrived 2 days later for the emergency council session. She was shorter than Vathek expected, older with gray hair and tired eyes, but when she spoke, everyone listened. "You asked us to save you," Caney said without preamble. "We did. But now you need to understand what that means." She pulled up data displays. "You thought we were pacifists because we haven't had a major war in 250 years. You saw our peace monuments and anti-war literature and assumed we were afraid to fight. You were wrong." The display changed. showing human history. Not the wars this time, but the innovations. Gunpowder, cannons, rifles, machine guns, tanks, aircraft, nuclear weapons. Each invention more deadly than the last. Humans are persistence hunters, Caney explained. On our homeworld, we evolved by chasing prey until it died of exhaustion. We're not the fastest or the strongest species, but we never stop. We never give up. We adapt to anything. She pulled up more data. When we invented agriculture, we used those skills to create better weapons. When we learned metalworking, we made swords. When we discovered chemistry, we made explosives. When we split the atom, we made bombs that could destroy cities. Every technological advance in human history has been weaponized within a generation. We can't help it. It's how our minds work. We see a new discovery and immediately think, how can I use this to defeat my enemy? Threx clicked his mandibles. But you stopped fighting your own wars. Yes, Caney agreed. Because we realized we were too good at it. The climate wars of 2089 killed 1 billion people in 10 years. We looked at our weapons and realized the next war would be the last war. So we stopped. We unified. We made a choice, but you didn't disarm, Vathek said. No, we just aimed our guns somewhere else. Caney's eyes were hard. We knew that someday something would come from the stars. Something that would threaten us. And when it did, we would need to be ready. She closed the display. You thought you were giving us protectorate status. You thought you were protecting us, limiting us, keeping the galaxy safe from our violent history. But we let you think that. It was easier than explaining the truth. Which is? Asked the Delphine representative. Humans don't fear war, Caney said softly. We fear what we become during war. We fear how good we are at it. We fear the part of ourselves that enjoys finding elegant solutions to the problem of killing. That's why we stopped fighting each other. Not because we're weak, but because we're strong. Too strong. Dangerously strong. The chamber was silent. Vathek's colors shifted through confusion, fear, understanding, and back to fear. The swarm is still out there, Caney continued. They're regrouping, adapting to our tactics. This was just the first battle. The war is going to get worse before it gets better. You need to decide right now, do you want our help or not? What kind of help? Threx asked carefully. Complete help. We'll train your soldiers in human combat doctrine. We'll share our weapons technology. We'll take command of the defense fleets because, frankly, you don't know how to fight a war like this. You've spent 1,000 years using military force for police actions and territorial disputes. The swarm is different. This is existential warfare. Survival of the fittest. Kill or be killed, she paused. But if we do this, you have to accept what that means. We will make decisions you don't like. We will take actions that horrify you. We will do whatever is necessary to eliminate the threat. Because that's what war is. Not a political tool or a negotiation tactic. War is organized violence applied until one side stops existing. Vathek found his voice. And after? When the swarm is defeated? Caney smiled sadly. Then you'll have to live with the fact that you asked monsters to save you. And you'll have to D6 months into the war. Threx stood in a human training facility and watched his soldiers learn to kill. The Krathar warriors had always considered themselves the finest fighters in the galaxy. They had warrior traditions going back 10,000 years. They trained from birth in combat arts. They thought they knew war. The humans taught them they knew nothing. Again, barked Sergeant Williams, a human trainer with a scar across his face. You're thinking like duelists. This isn't honor combat. This is warfare. 3-man teams, overlapping fire, advance under cover. The Krathar tried again. They moved forward in formation, firing at holographic targets. It looked good to Threx, but Williams just shook his head. You're still treating each target as a separate duel. Stop that. Target priority. Most dangerous first, not closest first. Use suppression fire to pin them down. Throw grenades to flush them out. One team advances while 2 provide cover. It's not complicated, but it was complicated. The humans made warfare into a science. They had tactics for everything. Urban combat, forest fighting, zero-gravity boarding actions, chemical warfare, nuclear engagement protocols. Every situation had a doctrine, a procedure, a best practice. How do you remember all this? Threx asked Williams during a break. Williams shrugged. We train until it's instinct. Every human soldier learns the basics: shoot, move, communicate. Everything else builds on that. We've had centuries to perfect the training, but no wars to use it in. We wargamed instead, simulations, exercises. We fought thousands of battles against imaginary enemies. Turned out the swarm matches our projections pretty well. We've been ready for something like them for 100 years. Threx watched his soldiers try the exercise again. This time they did better. They were learning to think like humans, to see combat as a problem to solve rather than a test of personal honor. It bothered him, but it also saved lives. On Earth, factories ran 24 hours a day building weapons. The humans called it total war mobilization. Every resource focused on the war effort. Every mind working on the problem. It was something the Council species had never done because they'd never needed to. Vathek visited one of the factories and watched automated systems assemble missiles by the thousands. "This is incredible," he said to his human guide. "You could supply the entire Council military with this one facility." "This is one of 40 factories," the guide replied. "We have 300 shipyards building warships, 500 training facilities producing soldiers. The entire species is working on this. But what about your economy? Your civilian life? The economy is now a war economy. Civilian life is on hold. We did this before during our world wars. When the survival of our species is at stake, everything else becomes secondary." Vathek's colors shifted with discomfort. "That seems extreme. Welcome to human warfare. We don't fight wars like you do as a side project of your civilization. When we fight, everything fights. That's what total war means." In space, the war had become a massive chess game across light years. The swarm controlled 50 systems. Humans and Council forces controlled 200. But the swarm was learning, adapting, growing smarter. Captain Shaw stood on the bridge of the Endeavour studying tactical displays. His fleet was preparing to assault a swarm-held world in the Viridian sector. Intelligence said the swarm had built something there, some kind of breeding facility. "Conventional assault won't work," his tactical officer said. "They've adapted to our standard tactics. They'll see us coming and counter." Shaw nodded. He'd been reading human military history in his spare time. Ancient battles from Earth before spaceflight. One kept coming to mind: Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off a 1,000,000-man army. "We're not going to assault the planet," Shaw decided. "We're going to make them come to us." His officers looked confused. "Sir, set up orbital bombardment platforms. Start destroying the breeding facility from orbit. Make it slow. Make it painful. They'll have to respond or lose the facility. That will take weeks." "Yes, and they'll try to stop us. When they send their fleet, we'll be in a defensive position with the planet's gravity well giving us an advantage. We turn their own planet into a trap." It worked. The swarm sent waves of ships to drive off the human fleet. But Shaw had chosen his position carefully. The swarm ships had to climb out of the gravity well, burning extra fuel, arriving disorganized. The human fleet cut them apart in carefully planned kill zones. 3 weeks later, the breeding facility was destroyed, and Shaw had lost only 12 ships. The swarm had lost hundreds, but not everyone celebrated. Vathek met with Chen in a quiet room far from the Council chambers. "I need to talk about what your species is doing," he said. "What specifically?" "Everything." Vathek's colors were troubled. "The siege of Viridian. You destroyed a breeding facility by systematically bombarding it for 3 weeks. The intelligence reports say you could have taken it in a direct assault. With 40% casualties," Chen replied. "Shaw's method saved lives. It also meant bombing the facility continuously for 21 days. The swarm creatures inside were alive during that time. It was—" Vathek struggled for the word. "Cruel?" Chen supplied. "Yes, it was. This is what I'm talking about. Your people do things that work, but they're brutal, harsh. Sometimes they seem unnecessary." Chen poured herself water. "Let me tell you about acceptable losses, Vathek. It's a human military concept. When we plan an operation, we calculate how many casualties we're willing to accept. If a direct assault costs 40% casualties and a siege costs 12%, we choose the siege. Even if it's crueler. Even if it takes longer, because we value our soldiers' lives. But the swarm creatures are trying to exterminate us. This is existential war, Vathek. We're not police keeping peace. We're fighting for survival. There's no room for mercy." Vathek's colors dimmed. "I understand that. But I worry. What happens to your species when this is over? Will you be able to stop being monsters?" Chen looked at him for a long moment. "That's what keeps me awake at night." The turning point came when human intelligence located the Queen world. Deep in swarm space, hidden behind layers of defense, sat the hive mind's nexus, the Queen consciousness that controlled every swarm creature in the galaxy. Admiral Caney called a meeting of all senior officers and council representatives. The room was packed with beings from every species, all looking tired. The war had been grinding on for 8 months now. Everyone had lost friends, family, homeworlds. "We've found their headquarters," Caney announced, pulling up a star chart. "The Queen World, take it out and the swarm dies. Every creature everywhere all at once. The hive mind collapses. What's the defense like?" Threx asked. "Massive. They have thousands of ships, orbital platforms, the whole planet covered in weapons. A direct assault would cost us half our fleet." "But you have a plan," Vathek said. It wasn't a question. Caney smiled grimly. "When do I not have a plan?" She outlined it, a two-pronged attack. One fleet would assault the outer defenses, drawing swarm forces. While they were engaged, a second fleet would jump directly into low orbit and deploy ground forces. Marines would fight their way to the Queen consciousness and destroy it. It was bold. It was risky. It would cost thousands of lives. "This is our one chance," Caney said. "If we fail, the swarm will know their Queen world is vulnerable. They'll move it, hide it better. We won't get another shot." The vote was quick. Every species committed their remaining forces. The largest fleet in galactic history began to assemble, but in private Vathek expressed his concerns to Chen. "Even if we win, I'm not sure the galaxy will be the same. We've seen what humans can do now. We've seen your weapons, your tactics, your capacity for violence. Some council members are more afraid of you than the swarm. Are you one of them?" Chen asked. Vathek's colors shifted. "I don't know. You saved my homeworld. You've saved billions of lives. But you've also shown us something terrifying. What a species becomes when it puts all its intelligence and creativity into the art of killing. You're too good at this, Chen, and that scares me." Chen nodded slowly. "It scares us too. That's why we stopped fighting ourselves. That's why we built our civilization around peace. We know what we are, Vathek. We know what lives inside us. And after this war is over, we'll have to put that monster back in its cage. I just hope we remember how." 3 days later, the combined fleet jumped to the Queen world. Threx commanded the assault fleet. Shaw led the insertion force. Admiral Caney coordinated from the command ship, watching hundreds of displays, managing the largest military operation in galactic history. "All ships," she broadcast. "This is it. This is what we've been fighting for. The swarm ends today, or we do. Show them why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Show them what happens when you threaten our worlds, our allies, our future. No mercy, no prisoners, no survivors." The fleet engaged the enemy. Space lit up with weapons fire. Ships burned and died. And deep in his command center, Vathek watched the battle unfold and prayed that when this was over, humanity would remember how to be the peaceful species they pretended to be. Because now he'd seen the truth. Humans didn't fear war. They feared themselves at war, and they were right to. The Battle of Queen World lasted 17 hours. Captain Shaw's dropship hit the atmosphere at terminal velocity, surrounded by hundreds of others. Swarm defense platforms fired constantly, turning the sky into a web of death. Ships exploded around him, burning metal and dying screams on the radio. But the Marines kept coming. 30 seconds to landing, the pilot announced. Shaw checked his armor seals one last time. Around him, 20 Marines did the same. They'd trained for this mission for 3 months. They knew the layout of the Queen complex from orbital scans. They knew their target. They knew that most of them wouldn't make it home. The dropship crashed through a biostructure and hit the ground hard. Ramps dropped. Shaw ran out into hell. The surface of Queen World looked like the inside of a body. Organic buildings pulsed with life. The ground was soft, wet, covered in something that might have been blood or might have been lubricant for the massive swarm machines. Everywhere, swarm creatures swarmed to defend their home. "Push forward," Shaw ordered. "Don't stop, don't slow down." His Marines fired as they ran. Explosive rounds tore through swarm warriors. Grenades cleared clusters. Flamethrowers burned through the organic structures. It was brutal, ugly fighting. Nothing like the clean space battles. This was war at its most primitive. Soldiers fighting room to room, corridor to corridor, dying in holes and tunnels far from home. Above them, the space battle raged. Threx commanded the assault fleet with everything he'd learned from the humans. He didn't try to fight honorably. He hit the swarm from 3 directions at once, concentrated fire on their weakest points, used nuclear weapons without hesitation. When one of his ships was too damaged to fight, he rammed it into a swarm platform at full speed. The humans had taught him well.
War wasn't about honor.
It was about winning. Admiral Caney watched from the command ship, her eyes tracking 100 different feeds. She saw her soldiers dying. She saw ships exploding. She saw the casualty numbers climbing. 2,000 dead, 5,000, 10,000, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. This was the price of victory. Deep inside the Queen complex, Shaw's team reached the central chamber. Half his Marines were dead. The survivors were wounded, running low on ammunition, exhausted. But they'd made it. The Queen consciousness sat in the center, a massive brain thing connected to thousands of organic cables. It pulsed with light, controlling every swarm creature across the galaxy. Around it, warrior forms protected their Queen, bigger and more dangerous than anything Shaw had seen before. "Plant the charges," Shaw ordered. "Everyone else buy them time." His Marines opened fire. The room became a killing ground. Warriors fell but kept coming, their bodies piling up. Shaw emptied his rifle, switched to his sidearm, then his knife. Next to him, Private Chen went down. Then Sergeant Okoye, then half a dozen others, but the charges were set. "Fall back," Shaw screamed. The surviving Marines ran. The explosion followed seconds later, a massive blast that destroyed the Queen consciousness and brought the entire complex down on top of it. Shaw and 3 Marines made it out. The rest died buying them those precious seconds. Above the planet, every swarm ship suddenly stopped moving. They drifted dead in space, the hive mind severed. Across the galaxy, swarm creatures on thousands of worlds simply shut down. The war was over. The silence in Admiral Caney's command center was broken by cheering. Species from across the galaxy celebrated, hugging each other, crying with relief. They'd won. Against impossible odds, they'd survived. Caney didn't cheer. She looked at the casualty reports. Final numbers: 2.4 million human dead, 8 million council species dead, entire world scarred, billions of lives disrupted. The cost was almost too much to comprehend, but the galaxy survived. That had to mean something. 3 months later, the Galactic Council met for the first time since the war ended. The Great Chamber was different now. Many seats were empty, their occupants dead. The walls showed scars from swarm attacks that had reached even this far. But they were rebuilding. The question on everyone's mind was simple. What now? Vathek stood to address the assembly. His crystal body had new facets grown since the war started. "We gathered to discuss humanity's role in the Council. Before the war, we believed humans were pacifists. We were wrong." He pulled up images from the war. Human soldiers fighting, human ships bombarding, human tactics that valued victory over mercy. We've seen what humans are capable of. We've seen their weapons, their willingness to do whatever is necessary. Some council members believe we should restrict humanity now, before they become a threat to us. Chen sat in the human section, her face expressionless. She'd expected this. Fear always followed respect. But, Vathek continued, and his colors shifted. Others believe differently. I believe differently. He turned to face Chen directly. Humans aren't monsters. They're people who learned to control their worst instincts. They stopped fighting each other not because they were weak, but because they were wise. And when we needed them, they unleashed that controlled violence to save us all. Threk stood. "I fought beside humans. I watched them train my soldiers. I learned that war isn't about honor or tradition. It's about protecting what matters. Humans understand that better than any species in the galaxy." The Delphini representative bubbled agreement. "They saved my homeworld. Without human intervention, my species would be extinct. I will not vote to restrict the people who gave us a future." The debate raged for hours. Some species feared humanity. Others were grateful. All were confused about how to process what they'd seen. Finally, Chen asked to speak. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the chamber. "You asked us to save you, we did. The question now is what kind of galaxy we build after." She pulled up a proposal, something she and Caney had worked on for weeks. Humanity proposes the Joint Defense Initiative. We'll train council forces in modern warfare. We'll share our technology. We'll maintain a fleet ready to respond to threats, but the council will provide oversight. You'll have veto power over human military actions. We'll be your weapon, but you'll be our conscience. "Why would you accept restrictions?" someone asked. Chen smiled sadly. "Because we need them. During the war, we did terrible things. Necessary things, but terrible. We burned worlds. We showed no mercy. We became the monsters you feared, and it felt easy. Too easy." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Humans are dangerous. We know that. We've always known that. That's why we built a civilization around peace, around checks and balances, around making sure we could never unleash our full violence on each other again. This proposal extends that philosophy to the galaxy. You keep us in check. We keep you safe. Vathek's colors showed deep thought. You're asking us to trust you while acknowledging you can't be trusted. Yes, because that's the truth. We're not saints, Vathek. We're people who have seen what we're capable of and chosen to control it. But we need help with that control. We need you to remind us why we fight, to protect, not to conquer, to save, not to dominate. The vote took 3 days. In the end, it passed. Humanity would lead Council defense forces under Council oversight. Human military academies would train soldiers from every species. Human doctrine would become standard. But humans wouldn't have unlimited power. They'd be watched, guided, kept in check. Admiral Caney retired after the vote. She'd seen enough war for 100 lifetimes. At her farewell ceremony, she addressed the young officers who would take her place. We did what was necessary, she told them. We became what we had to become. But now the war is over and you have a harder job, remembering how to be human. Really human, not just the killing machines we had to be. She looked at each of them. The galaxy will call on you again someday. Another threat will come, and you'll have to unleash what we unleashed. But between now and then you practice peace. You remember why we fight. You never ever let yourselves forget that we're the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, and that's a responsibility, not a privilege. 1 year after the war, Captain Shaw stood in front of a wall aboard the Endeavour. It was covered in names. Every human who died fighting the swarm. 2.4 million names, carefully engraved. A young recruit stood beside him, fresh from the academy. Sir, do you think we'll have to fight again? Shaw touched one name on the wall. Private Chen, who died beside him in the Queen Complex. Probably. The galaxy's a big place. There will always be threats. Does that scare you? Terrifies me, Shaw admitted. Because now everyone knows what we can do. They've seen us at war. Some of them will try to use us. Others will try to stop us. And we have to be wise enough to know the difference. He turned to the recruit. That's your job now. Being strong enough to fight when necessary, and wise enough to know when fighting isn't the answer. It's a hard balance. How do you manage it, sir? Shaw looked back at the wall of names. I remember what we're protecting. Not territory. Not resources, people, lives, futures. When I start to enjoy the fighting too much, I come here. I read these names. I remember the cost. And I remind myself we're not warriors because we love war. We're warriors so others don't have to be. On Earth, Chen Liu walked through a peace garden in the rebuilt city of Shanghai. Children played around monuments to the fallen. Artists painted murals showing both the war and the peace that followed. Life continued as it always did. Her communicator chimed. A message far,